David Foster Wallace hid a secret message for you and I in his posthumous novel, The Pale King, that will transform how you view yourself and your place in the world. And it is nothing like all the advice you get from your favorite internet influencers that motivate you. Who is going to carry the boats, that sell you get rich quick dreams and throw you into their sales funnels, that do anything to keep you engaged so that you will watch the next ad. But there are no ads in The Pale King. There is no easy way to turn the advice from Wallace we are going to hear today into anything except what it is, because it's the hardest advice that you can take. Going full monk mode and detaching from reality and disciplining yourself is nothing compared to what Wallace is going to talk about today. And I already know there are some warriors out there, black belts in the arts of the keyboard, who are already typing, "Why would I listen to David Foster Wallace? Didn't he kill himself, right, Conscious?" And I would rather listen to someone who explored the crisis we are facing to an extreme level and brought back wisdom for you and I in a bodhisattvic way than a bunch of random people who have put nothing artistic or significant in the world and are just recycling what Earl Nightingale and Napoleon Hill said 100 years ago. And that's why we read literature. That's why on Right Conscious, I talk about the best books and authors of all time, because nonfiction doesn't touch your soul. Do you think that it's a coincidence in the Bible, the Gita, in the stories of Buddha, that all the greatest lessons are done through stories? They could just say the piece of advice, but none of us would remember it. The Bible could be a 20-page manual, and there have been plenty of those in history. Why do none of them survive? Why do the compilations of stories of the great wars, the destruction, why do those stick? It's because books are the most powerful medium of art in the world, or I should say the written language, and it will continue to be that even if we are living in a post-literate society. And this is why all the personal development bros reading Atomic Habits and Alex Hormozy, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and all of that never really break through in a spiritual, intellectual, or emotional way in their life. It's why they will continue to stay stunted. Because many times a man or a woman needs to connect to something transcendent, to a story, to a higher purpose, to become great. But Wallace is about to tell us right now why the journey to that greatness, to that quantum leap, isn't going to look like the Lord of the Rings or the adventure story that we all love, like Treasure Island, but rather happen every single day at the job that you hate. And so let us now hear from Wallace. I learned that the world of men as it exists today is a bureaucracy. This is an obvious truth, of course, though it is also the ignorance of which causes great suffering. But moreover, I discovered in the only way that a man ever really learns anything important, the real skill that is required to succeed in a bureaucracy. I mean, really succeed. Do good, make a difference, serve. I discovered the key. The key is not efficiency or probity, which is like being super moral, or insight or wisdom. It is not political cunning, interpersonal skills, raw IQ, loyalty, vision, or any of the qualities that the bureaucratic world calls virtues and tests for. The key is a certain capacity that underlies all these qualities. Rather, the way that an ability to breathe and pump blood underlies all thought and action. The underlying bureaucratic key is the ability to deal with boredom. Once again, the key to getting everything you want to life is your ability to deal with boredom, to function effectively in an environment that precludes everything vital and human, to breathe, so to speak, without air. The key is the ability, whether innate or conditioned, to find the other side of the rote, the picayune, the meaningless, the repetitive, the pointlessly complex, to be, in a word, unboreable. It is the key to modern life. If you are immune to boredom, there is literally nothing you cannot accomplish. And Wallace is 100% correct here in every single category of growth: physical, intellectual, mental, and spiritual. Because we all love to see David Goggins say, "Who's going to carry the boats?" But David Goggins' body is broken. All these influencers who are on steroids, who we all look up to, are going to have broken bodies by the time they are 40 or 50. And a lot of the time, the way that you gain strength, look good, get endurance, flexibility, whatever, isn't through putting on Rage Against the Machine and chugging some pre-workout, but rather following a very systematic plan that may require really long rest periods, or that systematized and that focuses on technique, sometimes techniques that take months to learn in a proper manner. And what do? We blow through all that. I know how to work out. I worked out with my dad in the garage growing up. I was on the football team. I watched Dr. Mike. And the physical world is a really easy example, but we all know this in the intellectual world. If you want to grow at all and not just be some loudmouth faker, you are going to have to sit down and read these books and then reread them alone in a room. You're not going to be performing at the coffee shop and, opening up Infinite Jest. What are you reading? I'm reading do you know that Sigmund Freud had a protege named Otto Rank? You're not going to be doing that. You're going to be reading Rank, then reading Jung, and then connecting the ideas, then reading biographies, all for what purpose? Unknown. The same is true in the emotional world. This is why so many men and women never break through in relationships or can't handle things like meditation or other like consciousness or emotional expanding practices, because they all make you confront boredom. The same is true in the spiritual world. It's really easy to take 6 grams of shrooms and start talking to God. But to develop a true sattvic or middle way lifestyle, to really connect with God, to be a beacon of light for everyone, requires decades of practice. We have all these Charles Manson cult leaders and, like I said, all these people that want to do all this really fast. But in actuality, it's about getting in touch with your body, mind, soul, or, emotions for decades. And almost none of that is going to be external or fun. And so in David Foster Wallace's The Pale King, he is talking about, a lot of the time in the novel, the IRS and, finding this like transcendent state through boredom, through the tax code, through all this, monotony and all of that. But if you look back in history and you just understand how energy and growth works in general, it's whatever our society is avoiding the most, rejecting the most, is what we need to lean into to grow the most. And what do you think all these social media companies are preventing us from being? Bored. And one of the more crazy things I ever learned was that our concept of boredom is actually modern, that for 99% of us, our families throughout time were never bored. Did you know that the English noun boredom didn't appear until the 1760s, and it wasn't used in literature in a popular way in the English language? And if it was popular in other languages, it would have found its way into the English language much earlier. Chaucer was hundreds of years before 1852 in Bleak House when Charles Dickens says the word boredom for the first time. 1852, everyone. And the term before that, like the Greeks and others had a term, but their term was not about being bored about life, but being spiritually slothful, not caring about God enough, which is totally different than just, what do I want to do? I'm so bored. I'm going to get on the phone. Today, my wife and I were driving, and we were going past our local high school, and like the seniors were all leaving. And I'm in this small town, and we saw a bunch of kids like in a pickup truck, and the front was filled, and so there were like 3 kids in the back of the pickup truck. And my wife asked me, because all 3 kids in the back and in the front, all on their phones, and they were like the jocks, they were like the cool kids, they weren't like the weird kids or something like that. And she asked me, Ian, what did we used to do when we sat in the back of pickup trucks? And I said, we talked to each other. We'd open the little window and mess with our friends in the front, listen to the conversation, hear the music coming out. We would lay down and look at the sky. Like, I've done it a million times. I remember I went to this running camp, and we'd get there early, and it was like high elevation, crazy running camp. And my coach, we'd get dropped off by our parents, and my coach, because we showed up early, because there were so many of us, would pack us in the back of his pickup truck, and it was like a covered shell, and there'd be like 5 of us smushed back in some like little Nissan shell, totally illegal, totally unsafe. And we drive like 90 minutes each way into the mountains, and it'd be pouring rain and humid, and we'd have a blast. There was nothing to do. Someone would sleep. So boredom was invented because of our obsession with time, because of the Industrial Revolution. These factories, this new bureaucracy systematized time. work was now repetitive daily. It didn't matter about the season necessarily, and it was detached from any form of meaning, any form of purpose, any form of ritual. If you think of like the agrarian lifestyle or whatever, it was seasonal. There was meaning, there were patterns, there were songs, there were stories. But in the factory where it's brutal conditions and you're getting sick and dying and people are dying and it's terrible and you have this terrible factory boss, you become alienated from the fruits of your labor and thus yourself. And that's a line from Karl Marx. You know, everyone today is like, oh, Karl Marx is so wrong. And it's like, yeah, maybe you don't believe in communism, but he was right about that. He was right. And he knew where we were heading. He knew that in this mass production era that when you don't see where or have any connection to your fruits of your labor, you have no idea what's going on. I remember there was this, I'll never forget this. There was this woman who I was talking to, and she had this, she was like trying to be spiritual or whatever. And she was like justifying her job, like, yeah, it's like increasing the GDP. And it's like, Jesus Christ. And it's interesting because boredom. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that we need to go back to this lifestyle where we're just constantly, working ourselves to death and we don't need to be bored anymore. We now have leisure time. We aren't working really in factories anymore. So this idea of boredom, this energy is going to be a real thing now for us, and we're going to have to deal with it. But Nietzsche said something, I can't remember it exactly, that boredom boredom precedes two things: creative explosions or like existential dread. And I get it. And that's why the attention economy, social media has exploded, because I'm probably preaching to the choir here. You've pushed through boredom before and made big strides in your life, right? But for every you, there's 25 others who feel this dread. And that's, sadly, because we haven't promoted the arts or helped people with initiation and other things find direction in their life, that they have this angst, they have this dread, and there's nowhere to put it. They don't know how to get started. They're not go-getters, They don't have that it factor yet. They haven't activated the fire within. And so they get sucked into, these things that relieve that boredom. And Wallace knows this when he says, to me, at least in retrospect, the really interesting question is why dullness proves to be such a powerful impediment to attention, why we recoil from the dull. Maybe it's because dullness is intrinsically painful. Maybe that's where phrases like deadly dull or excruciatingly dull come from. Continuing, but there might be more to it. Maybe dullness is associated with psychic pain because something that's dull or opaque fails to provide enough stimulation to distract people from some other, deeper type of pain that is always there, if only in an ambient, low-level way, in which most of us spend nearly all our time and energy trying to distract ourselves from feeling, or at least from feeling directly or with our full attention, Admittedly, the whole thing's pretty confusing and hard to talk about abstractly, but surely something must lie behind not just Muzak in dull or tedious places anymore, but now also actual TVs in waiting rooms, supermarkets, checkouts, airport gates, SUVs back seats, Walkman, iPods, Blackberries, cell phones that attach to your head. The terror of silence with nothing diverting to do. I can't think anyone really believes that today's so-called information society is just about information. Everybody knows it's about something else way down. And this is a really important topic for Wallace because, first of all, in Infinite Jest, he predicted all of this. He predicted how technology was going to affect us. He predicted the rise of FaceTime. He predicted streaming services like Netflix, like really crazy stuff. It's always scary to kind of read it. But as an educator, as a teacher, as a writer, as someone who thought about these things, as someone who was an addict, who, did abuse people, who did abuse himself, like did all this crazy shit, those are the type of people who eventually killed themselves. Those are the type of people to blow the whistle. We don't need to, follow David Foster Wallace's daily routine. You don't need to follow anyone's daily routine. And so when people say, oh, he killed himself, I'm like, dude, no one's idolizing him. No one's preaching. But a lot of the time, I love to talk about classic authors and about the root of ideas because there's a rawness to it. Now, everyone, you can get on social media. Try to be more mindful. What happened to my life when I quit social media and all this bullshit. It's been commodified. It's an aesthetic now. But when we go back to the OGs, they're writing in the calm before the storm, before the war breaks out. And a lot of the time, it's through returning to them and their ideas that we can really ground ourselves and pull ourselves out of a lot of this BS. And so with this last quote I just talked about, Wallace makes so many good points. And people will say, oh, David Foster Wallace is a bad writer. Guys, I read books of essays all the time and essays online. I read dozens of essays every single week. David Foster Wallace is a damn good writer, especially when he's talking about stuff like this. He is one of the best. He's very readable and can get a lot of deep information across really well. Back when I was a high school teacher, I wouldn't make kids a lot of the time read entire Wallace essays because those could get like insanely long and tedious. But like quotes like this or pages of the essays or some of the shorter ones, some of the more effective stuff I've ever done. It was actually really surprising. Some of the biggest breakthroughs I've had as a teacher, and a lot of them came in my last year when I kind of put it all together, was because of David Foster Wallace and what he talks about. And so let's talk about this idea of why do we recoil from the dole, from being bored? People will go to, I've been talking about the light stuff, just scrolling social media. But in the, even the past 100 years, even before Walkmans and all this, even throughout time, at some level, once things opened up a little bit, people would go engage in fighting, in war, in, promiscuous sex, in a robbery and crime, and all of this stuff to avoid this feeling, to avoid the feeling of like you're doing nothing. And what's crazy is that for basically all of us, everything we want is on the other side of boredom. Literally all my writing dreams, all the dreams I have for this channel and creating a literary renaissance hinge on me being bored. The easiest part of my job and what I do here for you guys is sitting and talking with you guys. But before this video, I had to set up the lights, set up the camera. Not hard, right? I was researching, but then I spent this morning like 2.5 hours putting together like my book club selections that I talked about earlier, because we read 6 to 10 novels every single month, and each one of them needs their own customized webpage on my Substack with a cover art photo, a write-up, the link, the time, and then all of it needs to link to a general post later. All needs to be scheduled. And to do a good job, I can't be playing Netflix or something like that, or I just sound like it doesn't have life to it. And so I'm just sitting here in silence or with some like ambient music on doing it. But that's the root of my business. If I don't get that released, then the book club doesn't happen, or people are behind. It's happened to me before. I've neglected it because I'm like, dude, I don't want to do this. Then no one shows up to the club because everyone only had 2 weeks to read the book, or, 6 out of the, whatever, however. And then when this video is done, the editing, the thumbnail, the upload, the description, the titles, all of that stuff is going to actually take longer than it took to film this video, and none of it's very fun for me. And we've been sold this lie by all these internet influencers: automate everything that someone else can do for you. But many of us are too poor to do that. I'm a booktuber. We don't make this insane amount of money where I can have an editor and a cinematographer and a personal assistant, a thumbnail designer, and this and that. And the same is true in your life. And so we're going to have to do all of this ourselves. We're going to have to write our books ourselves. That's what I talk about in the literary renaissance. You're not going to have a world-class editor. You're not going to have a marketing team. You're not going to have all of this. This is all on your back. This entire channel. I'm not sitting here bragging, but I've done everything. I don't think I've commissioned one thing. The only collaborations that have happened are like some of the interviews I've done. And I'm planning to continue that outside of like someone designing my book cover, because that's like, I feel like something like a professional should do. That's going to be the same in your life. You're going to be the one cleaning your toilet, doing your laundry, and figuring out like your workout stuff. You're not going to have a personal trainer. You're not going to have an intimacy coach for you and your wife. You're going to have to figure it all out yourself. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be tedious, and it's going to be boring. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be bumps. There's going to be learning lessons. It's going to be excruciating. Plus, if you are going to do more than what's necessary, which is what, if you want to be a writer whose work is read, if you want to be canonical, if you want to have a really good relationship, or make a lot of money, or get really strong or flexible, you're going to have to do more on top of everything you are already doing. And the thing is about being okay with boredom, which is actually a really good point also, is that most of you guys hate your job, don't like what you are doing, and feel the dread, feel like you have a larger purpose and all of that. And a lot of it's because you have these boring tasks and all this stuff, or this all this micromanaging going on. And it's not human. In the earlier quote, Wallace was saying that our bureaucratic lifestyle is not human. People didn't do this. People didn't sit in rooms all day with bright lights on them and, talk about intense books for hours at a time, or do do what you do at your job, whatever creative task. Even like a lot of construction jobs now, unless you're doing like pure like grunt labor, and doing it is like you're doing mathematics and figuring out the stuff, then going to Home Depot. Like there's a lot of work to it and a lot of kind of boredom and repetition. But if you are pessimistic about it all, that's when you become the dude that, drinks 12 beers every day, who's complaining about his job. And one of the best things that I learned is to don't resist. Just let the job happen to you. And then on the outside, work on everything else. And then let the transition happen naturally. You'll eventually just energetically kick yourself out of the job. But don't fight it, because by fighting it, as you probably know, it makes it a worse experience. It's what makes it excruciating. And so if you can get over that. And so, I feel like a job is actually the trial run. I've never known someone who had a job is like, fuck this, and like really pessimistic. I wasn't the best worker, because I would just be like, hey, I don't really need to like put in all this extra time, but I wasn't a complainer. But I've never known a complainer who's ever gone on and done anything else. And even if you don't want to be a famous writer or do anything like that, by managing your personal time and learning to be bored, your life can become something beautiful. You really can serve the world at large. And even if you don't do some scalable art form or, get on social media, you will still be the beacon of light for so many people in your life. It sounds dumb, but when I go to the grocery store, I see people who don't feel like positive members of the community. They're just slouched over, not happy, not just to like talk to me as a random person in the grocery store, but that's how you could see their energy field. And when I meet another uplifted person out in the world, it always uplifts me. It always makes me a better person. I smile when I'm done talking to them and I'm walking away. I'm like, wow, how fun was that? And so to embark on this path that Wallace is talking about, you guys, it doesn't happen overnight, because all of us are or have been programmed by all of these distractions. And so just going on a 1 month fast or doing a dopamine fast, but putting a block on your phone, that's not going to be enough, because this is a total mind shift change. When you think about this, when guys say, I'm going to go monk mode, a lot of the time it's men who have no real responsibilities in the world and don't have to talk to anybody, can just code or go to their job. They don't have a wife, a girlfriend, or a boyfriend or whatever, but they are still chasing dopamine goals a lot of the time. They are basically just going through this cyclical process, and it's a pseudo form of shadow work where they think they are really evolving and individuating. But all they are doing is just circling the drain, because you know what being a man is about? It's about raising. You can renounce if you want. You could take the monk path and actually be a monk and not be like coding and doing that. If you want to detach from society and go live in the woods and do that, then go ahead. No one actually does that though. But being a conscious human in the world is about raising the stones. It's about building something. It's about creating a piece of art. If you are an artist, raising a family, literally you're raising a family. That is your job. You're raising people and teaching them to be good citizens in the world. That is an important project if you want to do that. Starting a nonprofit or a charity or a business that's actually helpful, mentoring other people in transformative things like martial arts or yoga or at church, helping build your church up, whatever. Those are, and actually doing it, not just like, I spend an hour a week doing it. All of those tasks I just talked about are all about boredom. I do the same thing with my daughter every single day for hours when I'm hanging out and taking care of her. We read Chicka Chicka Boom Boom and all the other books and look at this and look at that. And I could sit and throw on an audiobook or like do random things like that. And some days when I'm too tired and had enough, I do that. But I try as hard as I can not to do that and keep myself principled and let myself be bored, because eventually I start having a really fun time. It starts becoming my favorite part of the day. And I'm helping her. And then in the long run, that's going to establish a great relationship between me and her and then her siblings and all of this stuff. The same is true with this channel. It's funny because I've been saying not the same thing. I make different variations of videos and talk about different topics, but I've talked about the literary renaissance and the principles and logic pros for years now, and will continue till the day that I die, because I believe in the movement. I don't care how many times I have to say something in a different way to activate people, to go over the fundamentals with you guys, because it's a worthwhile project. And if you're still listening, it's proof that it's worthwhile, And so I really learned about this during my time in yoga, because here's my yoga highlight reel, everyone. I don't know if you guys know this, but I started yoga in high school. I've been a yoga teacher for like 14 years or so. And this is the asana stuff, but I'm really actually more into like breathing exercises and meditation and karma yoga and the lifestyle aspects. But if you look at this pose right here, it's called Marichasana D. And this is a pretty hard yoga pose. It requires you to have a deep lotus and a high ability to twist and bind and all of this stuff. And so right here, I'm in the full expression of it. But in every pose, there are these little minute things that you can work on to master it. And I had a teacher tell me that, Ian, show me some stuff that I could work on. And I said, well, I didn't say anything. But she told me, yeah, you're going to have to do this pose a couple times a week for 5 or 10 years to be able to get these things down and actually master it. And you just can't hop into this pose out of nowhere. You have to warm up for at least like 30 or 40 minutes to really be able to work on it. And so people like her and, countless others. And the same is true in strength training. So I ran into the same thing. If you're just doing hypertrophy, you never really run into this necessarily. But if you're focused on strength gains and really only strength or endurance, I ran into this with long distance running. It's all about being bored. I years ago when I was doing jiu-jitsu in Las Vegas would occasionally go to these private training sessions with Mikey Musumeci. He's a world champion, but it would start at 12, but him and his sister would already have been there at 9 a.m. and had been drilling for hours. They would just drill the same berimbolo move in jiu-jitsu for 3-4 hours and then do it after. Just hours and hours of the same move, so it would be so deep in their muscle memory. And like I said, when you look at how most people approach physical fitness, 99% of them they could be at that level, but they don't want to engage in that small stuff that really creates those crazy breakthroughs because it's just absolutely boring. It's easier to go to a jiu-jitsu class and not drill a move 10,000 times and just rip people's heads off. It's easier to just go to yoga class and do your thing or just always be doing something different. It's easier once you hit the intermediate levels of strength to just go try some other different, I'm going to go do kettlebells. I'm going to go do calisthenics and just never actually master one of them. And so true mastery. And that's what the bureaucratic world is. Our world, as Wallace says, is so bureaucratic because the standard is so high now. We have so much time that to really hit these high levels of expression or, stand on the shoulders of the authors before us, we have to put in the 10,000 hours. And what's interesting is that because there have been so many pioneers before us, especially in between the 1970s and the 1990s, who didn't have digital technology to distract them, but had almost all the information we have today, there are people who have gone all the way and have raised the standard. And it's actually interesting because we almost have an obligation to follow it. We have an obligation to not write worse than the authors who came before us. We have an obligation, or at least we have to fill this vacuum knowing that these individuals in the past already did all this. And so if we want to go to the next level, we have to become more bored. Or I shouldn't say, we have to blow through boredom and make it fun and be more disciplined. And that is what our society is now. That's why I love that digital technology and sports betting and every single game I watch is ever present, because there's such a strong polarity and there are so many crazy distractions now that if I resist them, then that only gives me strength. That only gives me power. Do you know what's better than getting with some hot woman? Is rejecting them because you are chasing something of a higher principle, whether that's monogamy in a relationship because you're trying to build a family, or art, or some of these different things. I'm not saying you need to be a monk, but not having to be needy anymore, not having to be bored is one of the most liberating things because it gives you true freedom. It gives you actual personal accountability and a path to something greater. And so continue the fight, everyone. Lean into this. Look at your life from the angle of 3 to 5 years, from 5 to 10 years. What can you accomplish? What art can you put out there? How can you make your family better? How can you make your community better? All these different things are so important for you to do. And what's interesting that with Wallace is that's what he ran into. A lot of people just react to Wallace's suicide, but it's really the pharmaceutical industry's fault and his wife's fault. If I'm just going to, lay blame, he had tried to commit suicide and was talking about it and having a lot of problems a couple weeks before. And when you have someone like that who is withdrawing off of an antidepressant they had been on since basically they were 18 and 19 years old, and they're suffering from severe depression, you don't leave them alone. Even if they don't want to go to the hospital or to rehab or something like that, you send them, even against their wishes, because it's better to go through that painful time, through that withdrawal, through that whatever is happening, than to be dead. But before all that happened, and that's why David Foster Wallace made that last move. That's what he said. I want to feel. I want more energy. He took a risk that eventually, sent him to such a dark place that he thought that was the best choice that he can make. But if you look at his writing, if you look at what he was working on in The Pale King, he was, it was probably going to come out in like 2010, 2011, 2012, judging on by the pace that he was kind of going. And you know how big that would have been? It was already big. But instead, it's secret knowledge now. Instead, we have no literary celebrities. We have influencers. And so thank you to each and every one of you guys for being here. And I will see all of you guys very soon in my next video. Go check out some of my other David Foster Wallace stuff.